No one likes a creaky bike, and one of the common places it's often overlooked when you're servicing is the bottom bracket and crankset. It's one of the most common rotated parts on the bike, so it's not surprising that a lot of wear and tear goes through it. So here is GMBN's guide on how to service, clean and regrease your bottom bracket and crankset. For this video, we're going to use a SRAM XX1 crankset. Now you might have a Shimano crankset and it's slightly different procedure, but kind of similar. So just check out the manufacturer's guidelines before you start. We're also going to be using a screw-in bottom bracket. You might have a press fit. Again, just check out those manufacturer's guidelines and you'll find all the instructions that you need to do so. Now to carry out the procedure, you're going to need a few specific tools. I've got a range of Allen keys. I've got an 8mm, 5mm and a 4mm. Also got a rubber mallet to knock out the crankset, the Holotech 2 bottom bracket tool, torque wrench, Loctite, some disc brake cleaner and also some rag. So let's get to it. The first thing that we're going to do is remove that left hand crank, and for that I'm going to need my 8mm Allen key. It's worth noting that the SRAM XX1 group set, it is almost like a self-extracting crankset. When you loosen off the bolt, the crank's actually going to come off itself and you're not going to need any additional tools to take it off. So you might notice that I wouldn't be able to actually push through the crankset. I've got this E13 chain guide in the way, and depending on what chain guide, or if you even have a chain guide, you're going to have to remove that. So I'm just going to use my 4mm Allen key and loosen off that top bolt, and it'll actually swing out and rotate. So we've got the chain guide out of the way, and it'll allow that right hand crank just to slide out. But before I do that, I'm actually just going to put the clutch mech on, and it'll allow me to slide that out, and I've got rid of the tension in the chain. So I'm just going to slide it out. I'm going to drop that chain off fully and I'll put it behind the actual chain guide, and it sits well out of the way, and that should just slide out like that. So you can see it's pretty dirty, so I'll give that a good clean before I reassemble it all. So at this point it's worth checking just the bottom bracket. Mine's still running smooth, so it could be that the creaking is coming just from all the dirt that you can actually see sitting around it. So I'm going to go ahead and now remove that. On this drive side, you just actually push down just to loosen it. You might actually have a couple of spaces, so just do know what order they do go in and put them on the side when you're actually removing the bottom bracket itself. It's worth noting as well that when you're removing a bottom bracket, that it's actually anti-clockwise thread, so just bear that in mind when you go to loosen it. So with the bottom bracket removed, I'm just going to give it a clean. I've got some disc brake cleaner here that I'm going to use. You can also use degreaser, but just don't spray it right inside, spray it onto a rag and then use a rag to get rid of all the dirt. It must have been Donnie that last cleaned my bike, because I'd never leave my bike that dirty. So we've got our bottom bracket shell all cleaned up. We're now going to go onto the crankset and the bottom bracket, and we're just going to use some disc brake cleaner again just to get rid of all that excess grease and sort of the dirt that's in around there and the spline. So coming onto the bottom bracket, we're just going to clean up each individual part. It is worth noting, if your bearings are a bit worn, you don't actually want to take them apart, re-grease them, that's not recommended. And just go out and get a new bottom bracket. It's the best possible solution. So with everything cleaned up, it's now just about assembling it and re-greasing it all. It is worth noting that if you do have a carbon frame, this one has actually got an aluminium insert, so I'm just going to use some standard grease, but you might need some carbon specific grease. Just check the manufacturer's recommendations before you go about putting it back together. So with all re-greased up, we're just going to put that bottom bracket cup back in, and we're starting with the left hand one first. There is actually an arrow of direction, but it is just going in clockwise. And already with that fresh grease, it's feeling smooth, and then we'll use a specific bottom bracket tool to tighten it right back up. With this one, we don't actually have a specific torque wrench for this tool, but it is recommended to tighten it up to 25 to 30 Newton meters. And I just go on a basis of just putting my hand right at the end of the BB tool and just lifting up and just applying a small amount of pressure. So we're now just going to go about putting the cranks back through the bottom bracket. Now my top tip for this one is actually to put the grease right inside the bottom bracket. And this will save when you put it on the spindle and it all being pushed right onto the outside. You sometimes get this big blotch of grease around here which just gathers grit and dirt, and that can be the cause of that dreaded creak. Just be sure that you do actually get it in between the chain, otherwise, well, you're going to have to take that crank back out. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop this crank cap back in. It separates the bottom bracket and the end of the spindle, and it just saves any water getting in there. So just pop that on. So now I'm just going to grease up the spindle and the end of the axle here, and just get in each slot just a little bit of grease, and that'll save it sort of if there is any corrosion over time. So now I'm just going to put that left hand crank on. Be careful to note that you do actually have the right hand crank facing downwards and you have this facing upwards. And then I'm going to use my 8mm Allen key just to tighten it right up. So again with this one, SRAM recommending tightening up to at least 48 Newton meters. I don't have that tool, so I'm just going to pop the Allen key in, and I'm just going to hold the right hand crank and just pull up on the end, and you can feel that that's pretty tight. All that's left to do is slip the chain back over and also reattach the chain guide. I can feel already that it's spinning nice and free, there's no drag there. So there we go, we've put the chain guide back on, clutch is ready to go, and I'm just going to give the cranks a few rotations just to make sure that everything's sound and there's no rubbing or anything that could cause a worry. What I'm actually going to do whilst I'm here is just check these 4 chainring bolts and make sure that they're tightened up. Now, SRAM don't actually give a recommended torque for them, but Shimano do. They recommend 12 to 15 Newton meters. So I've set mine up to 13 Newton meters, and I'm just going to check each one. So there you have it, how to clean, re-grease and reassemble your crankset and bottom bracket. Now this has been a viewer submitted request, so if you'd like to see some maintenance videos, leave your suggestions in the comments down below. For more great videos on JMBN, why not click up there for a how-to playlist? And if you haven't got rid of that dreaded creak, well, you might need to service your pedals. So click right there for how to service your Crank Brothers pedals. And if you haven't already, well, click in the middle to subscribe. You get a great video every day of the week.